Hello, everyone. Since most of us are meeting each other for the first time today, I'd like to ask a question that I ask to many people that I meet for the first time. If you had a circular cake that was infinitesimally thin, meaning thinner than the smallest length imaginable, thinner than any length that it can possibly exist in the universe, and thinner than one atom thick. However, this cake has an infinite diameter, meaning that the diameter reaches from the length of the universe and back and even more. How would you bake this cake, and how long would it take to bake? In the audience, who thinks that this cake will take an instantaneous amount to bake? How about who thinks that this cake will take an infinite amount to bake, longer than after the universe dies? Any other answers? Now, each answer for this question is justifiable, as if you say it's instantaneous, it's extremely thin, and in the real world, as cakes get thinner, they bake faster. And if you say that it's forever, it's large, and maybe the heat wouldn't get to the middle in time as the heat has to travel from the outside to the in. It's a quite paradoxical situation. Now, I have this question to so many people, and here are some of the responses. I've asked a high school graduate, and he said that the cake is completely flat. It must be the literal version of the second dimension. And since the second dimension can fit into the third dimension, there must be an oven in the third dimension that can accommodate this cake and bake it in finite time. My peer said that instead of trying to bake the whole cake as a whole, we should cut it into strips and blowtorch them in order to make the baking process faster. However, since that'll take a couple of years, the cake might actually rot before it's finished baking. I asked the computer science teacher, and he said that since this is not a real cake and it's only imaginary, baking doesn't apply to this cake. This ridiculous random answers to this even more ridiculous question is not exactly something that's focused in the K-12 system of education. In middle school, I was in a geometry class that required presenting one of Euclid's proofs to the whole class as a presentation every single class. The teacher helps us understand the meaning behind the proof and the reasoning, and also how to formulate a claim in order to prove a mathematical concept. However, a couple of weeks later, one of the students said that instead of trying to understand the actual proof itself, you should memorize them, since that'll help you get the grade. Now, this shows that the education as a whole has gaps in it that doesn't accommodate this imaginative type of thinking that we discussed in the infinite cake problem. Although there are teachers and students are brilliant, and you can take a normal situation and turn it into a ridiculous idea, we can do it by trying to make up an explanation to a question that doesn't exist. As for time, why does it flow from the present to the future instead of backwards from the present to the past? Now, we see time usually as a line where each point in that line refers to an event that happened in the time. But rather than looking at time like this, we can look at a deck of cards, where each card is a screenshot of the universe. Now, if we go look at the cards from the start to the finish, we will see time as we see it, as past, present, and future. If we look at the cards from the back to the start, then we'll see time going backwards from the future to the present to the past. However, if we shuffle it, it'll make spontaneous events appear, with one event not having correlation to another, with the cause and effect relationship being ruined. Richard Feynman's advisor also used this making things up formation in order to explore why all protons are the same. He speculated that one proton had traveled from the beginning of time to the end of time with only one proton in existence. Afterwards, the proton traveled from the end of time back to the beginning of time, where it saw a copy of itself while it was traveling from the beginning of time to the end of time. This was repeated many times so that in the universe, the proton would see many copies of itself traveling through time. By seeing time copies of itself, it's why all protons are the same. If this is true, it means that what's in your iPhone to what you ate at lunch are made of the exact same materials. If you can't make up a fairy tale on the spot to answer a question, you can try applying a normal idea to a random idea. Aliens are quite useful in this situation, as their interpretation for saying alien vary. If you were thinking of health or in a health class, you can try and combine hospitals or health with aliens. If you think of health, you think of maybe diseases or getting diseases. However, aliens do not exactly get diseases as far as we know. And we can combine this health and aliens to create a question of if Earth disease was contracted by the alien, then what kind of treatment could it receive in an Earth hospital? Now, if you try this method in class, your language arts teacher might say in a more sophisticated fashion that all inferences must be based on the text. I mean, you can't exactly argue that Romeo is actually an octopus that magically transformed himself into a human in order to fall in love with Juliet. However, this ridiculous speculation, if you try and look at it and get the essential core points from it, you can, instead of seeing just a ridiculous idea, you can implement it into an actual plausible idea. For example, if you say that teleportation is key to long-distance communication. Now, you can't exactly build a teleportation machine at this point in time. However, since teleportation is instantaneous travel, we can say that for long-distance communication, we need something that does not interfere with the current systems that are in place, and also has something to do with instantaneous ideas going from one place to another. We made the concept from teleportation travel from a mystical idea in science fiction into core points of instantaneous ideas from one place to another to no interference with other systems. As amazing as these ideas are, if we can't communicate them to other people, what point do they have? Now, instead of using long sentences to communicate the ideas, we should use pictorial diagrams in order to do so. Richard Feynman was famous for creating his Feynman diagrams, where he used pictorial diagrams instead of traditional equations to explain his concepts. By using these pictorial diagrams, he was able to cancel out the anomalies of infinities, and this led to some more understanding in the field of particle physics. We can also do this too. We all know that the Pythagorean theorem. It's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, just by seeing the equation, we see 1 square is equal to 2 other random squares, which doesn't make much sense. However, if we use a pictorial diagram, we know that the 2 smaller sides squared added together equal to the 1 larger side squared. Therefore, we got an understanding from this random equation that we just plugged numbers into to an actual pictorial understanding. Now, let's go back to the cake, the imaginary cake that's been baking in our oven for a couple of minutes now. Your cake is the mind, and the oven is the world. By changing the idea of how to bake the cake, you're changing the structure of the oven, which will change the state of the cake to be baked, indefinitely unbaked, and maybe undefined, or somewhere in the middle. Rather than using your answers as the ultimate correct solutions, you should explore the more ridiculous options in life in order to find the most strangest solutions. Thank you.